Hello everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today is all about making things longer, whether you're sewing from scratch or upcycling or altering a garment. I'm going to show you probably at least 7 different ways of adding length, either to sleeves or pants. I'm going to be starting by showing you some examples from past videos, and then I'm going to sew a couple of different ways of making sleeves longer, and then I'm going to finish by showing you 2 ways of making pants longer. So in these examples from past videos, I'm going to show you ways that in the past I've added length, but really tried to incorporate it into the design of the garment. So some of these are going to be kind of straightforward, just adding fabric to the bottom, but in a way that looks intentional and as if it's part of the design. You never want it to look like you just stuck extra fabric on. It's not going to look great. So an example from a past video is this tiered skirt that I made on my serger. And when I first made it for that video, it was really pretty. I was happy with it, but I just wanted it a little bit longer. So in this case, I didn't have any extra fabric. I had used every inch of it for this. So I just got lucky, went back to the fabric store, and they happened to have the same one. So I just added an extra tier. That's one way to make a garment longer. Even if this had been a different fabric, a ruffled tier added onto the bottom of a skirt or dress can look really, really pretty and really intentional. And I think having it as a gathered piece adds to that intentionality, like it makes it look like part of the design rather than just a straight piece, right? Gathering and turning it into a ruffle really does add something pretty to the design. And then here's an example from a previous video too, where I just didn't have any more fabric. This dress, I bought it kind of just as it was, and cute, super casual, it's just sort of a Saturday run around do grocery shopping kind of dress, but I wanted it a little bit longer, so I bought a completely different fabric. In fact, I didn't buy a fabric. This was an old tank top, and I didn't gather it. I just put it on straight because I only had so much fabric in that tank top. But what I tried to do to make it look more intentional, a couple things. I made the sides kind of do that little shirt tail end, so that looks like it's part of the design. And I chose a fabric that had colors that were already in the dress. That's really important, so it looks integral to it. And I sewed it underneath the original hem, so that little edge is there. I think that looks much better than just sewing it on in a regular seam. Putting it under that hem kind of just integrates it into the design more. So just being a little bit clever and creative about how you add on that extra fabric can make all the difference. Here's an example from my classroom. One of my students was making just a cute little navy blue pencil skirt and wanted it shorter. So she cut it off way too short. It was just too short, especially at the back. It was riding up at the back. Her butt didn't even know she got dressed that morning. So she cut it off way too short, and she had no more fabric. All she had was this piece that she had cut off. It was 8 inches deep. So what we did was we took that 8-inch piece and cut it into 2 4-inch strips, joined those strips together, pleated it in, and just look how cute it ended up. Like, it ended up better than the original pencil skirt would have. It's just super cute. And then this dress, also from a previous video, combining the 2 fabrics, like taking a totally different fabric and adding it onto the bottom, added length for me, but I wanted to do it again. I just didn't want to have a straight seam and add on a piece of fabric. It just doesn't look, it just never looks like part of the design. So what I did instead on this one was cut the dress on an angle and then added a flounce to that. And just having it at that angle just made it like 10 times prettier than it would have been with a straight seam. So all of these previous videos that I'm mentioning, I'll link them in the description, but they're all pretty straightforward and you can probably just go from what I've just described. I'm gonna start with the sweater that I'm wearing. I upcycled this one a few videos ago and it was way too tight and it was a long dress, and I posted it and I loved it. But one viewer commented that the 3/4 length sleeve was sort of hitting at an awkward length, and why don't I take the extra fabric that I cut off and add it to the sleeve? And then once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Now I have to do that because I think it really will look better. So I appreciate that comment. So I'm fortunate, right? I just happen to have kept the piece, and I think I'll be able to match up the design well. So that's going to be a good one, I think. So here's the sleeve that I've got, and this is what I have to work with. So I'm going to cut off the cuff, and I'm just doing a single layer so that I can follow that design exactly. I'm putting both sleeves together. If I was able to open the sleeve out flat, that's what I would have. Do you see what I mean? So I'm going to come down straight. If it does end up too wide at the cuff, I can always taper it in more later. I know on my sleeve, my sewing line is the top of the green. So that's my sewing line. I have to add seam allowance. So I'm cutting just a little bit below that gold line. Okay. So I'm going to try to reduce the bulk of this seam. And instead of serging it together, I'm going to serge both edges separately first. So once that top edge is serged, then I have to put it together and serge the side of that sleeve extension. I want to do two things. I want to really nail together that bottom edge with a nicely finished edge on my serging. And I want to match up the print as I go. So I might put a few clips in there. Peek inside, match up the pattern, and put a clip. Good. Okay, and then at this finished edge, I'm going to start there because I have no wiggle room, right? I want to just nail that together nicely. So put that together, slide it under, and just a couple stitches, and I want to end with the needles down. Good. Lift up, give that little serger tail a tug, bring that forward. Hopefully you've seen me do that before. It's such a good little trick. And then serge over my tail. Okay, good. So that's the nicely finished edge on the serger. I don't have to worry about threading that back. I don't have to take an extra step. And oh yes, look at my pattern. Oh, that's pretty good job there, Catherine. It looks good. All right. Oh, how fabulous. Okay, to the regular machine now. So here's my cutoff sleeve with the serged edge. And then my little sleeve extension, also with the serged edge. The body is inside out, and my little extension is right side out. So if I just tuck this in here, then I get them right side together, match up the little seam to the point of that. So here inside out now you can see what I did in that previous video where I added this gusset all the way down the side and into the sleeve to make this whole sweater bigger. So that part worked great. Okay, so I might just baste that first and check to make sure how that pattern looks and make sure I'm happy before I finalize it. This is also just a regular needle, nothing fancy going on here. Regular universal needle. But yeah, with that long stitch length so I can pull it out easily if I need to. Okay, let's see how that looks. So the seam looks a little wiggly, but that doesn't scare me because I'm going to take it to the iron and give it a good steam. But the pattern flows nicely. I think we're good. Okay, so I'll steam that flat and try it on before I do the second sleeve. But if it's all good, I'll finish up and then show you. That viewer was right? This is so much nicer with the full length sleeve, and that was pretty easy. If you look closely, you'll see that seam, but I really don't think anyone's going to be looking that closely at my elbows. And I don't even think I'm going to give that seam a second thought. It's just that the pattern is so visually stimulating and you just will never, your eye will never notice that seam. So I think this one's done. I really am so much happier with this sweater now. I'm looking at the before pictures and it really is so much better now, right? So thank you to that viewer that made that suggestion. That was a good one. Okay, so next in the category of adding extra fabric to the bottom of something, I've got this t-shirt. I thrifted it, it's fine. I've been doing a little bit of fitting on the sides and that's okay. but the sleeve is just rolled up and stitched down, and I'm not a big fan of that. I think that looks a little bit messy. And I have had a lot of requests asking if I could show how to make t-shirt sleeves longer. So that little stitched up bit there will just give me like, I don't know, 1.5 inches maybe of extra length, 3 centimeters, maybe 4. But if I wanted to add more, I'm gonna have to bring in another fabric. So I have this t-shirt, which is just the prettiest thing, right? I love that dandelion graphic, and the blacks match pretty well. It's just like a little bit off black, a little faded black. But I never wear this because it has this open back. I don't know what I was thinking when I bought that. I think it was just the dandelion I fell in love with. But that open back, it's not ideal for this project. Honestly, I would rather have the full back that I can cut some strips across the knit, right? But with this open back, I'm gonna have to use fabric that's off grain. So it's not ideal, but I think I'll be able to make it work. And to make it look really integral to the design, I'm going to take that beautiful dandelion graphic and put it onto the front too. So that's one example of like going that little extra mile towards something that's clever, creative, that kind of brings new life into your garment, can really make that additional fabric that you're tacking on really look purposeful. So first thing I'll do is take out that little stitched up roll and iron that down and just see what length that's giving me. And then I'm gonna see what I can get out of this back. If I had a different t-shirt where I could get my strip going across the knit, that would be so much better. But anyway, I'm gonna make it work with what I've got, right? And I'll show you how I'll just quickly add that graphic onto here. I think it's gonna be really pretty. So I took down the bit of stitching that was holding this sleeve rolled up. It's a little linty inside that roll. And that was not easy because it was held up with a bar tack. So I had to put it under a magnifier to unpick that bit. Oh well, it's done. As I say, I'm doing some fitting on the sides of this, like no big deal. I just took in the sides. And so I've only just basted them together. I haven't serged because I want to do some embellishment on the front of this. But today's video is about making things longer. So I'm going to extend this sleeve. What I started to play with is the part that I cut off the side of this t-shirt is just a skinny strip, but it's all I have to work with. Because what I'm thinking, and I just did quite a bit of playing, is like a wider sleeve. I'm going to play around with that, like keeping it wide, even flared maybe, and then a little bit of that stripe trim on the bottom. The stripe will go the opposite direction. I think that's fine. But it just brings that fabric back on, which hopefully makes it look more intentional. As I said, I'm going to have to go on the cross grain. So to make my life easier, I'm going to cut right up that seam. So these back pieces have a nicely finished hem. So I'm not going to cut that off yet, just in case I don't end up liking that little bit of trim on the bottom. I might not like it. I might not like anything here. Let's just try. What are you if you don't even try? So I kind of like the way this is flaring out. Ooh. Okay, that's kind of what I'm thinking, right? So that the sleeve kind of flares. I might not like it, and if I don't like the flare, I'll just taper it, no big deal. So I think I'm going to start with that though. I think I'll be just making this into a normal seam. Okay, here's a thought. Instead of putting that down at the bottom, I'm not super happy with this just being a plain seam. What if I put that there to soften that seam? I've already got the finished hem there. That makes sense, doesn't it? I think so. So I've got two little strips cut across the stripe, and I'm going to just attach it to the top of my sleeve extensions, and they're curling up like crazy. I cut them just as wide as I could, like I needed them 16 inches long. The maximum width I could get was just barely over an inch. So I'm going to serge to the top of the sleeve extension, then sew this extension on. And of course, whenever I serge, you can just sew and then zigzag your edges, or just do a double line of sewing. Serging is nice because it's a very small seam allowance. So if I just serge right on my edge, I'm losing as little as possible of this skinny little strip. Good. That looks kind of nice. So now I'll serge the edge of these little extensions. I'll just chop off that extra bit of this strip that I have there. There we go, just like that. Again, I think I'll start at that bottom edge just because that's the section I want to nail together, and I'll do that same little trick with this serger tail. Okay, both sleeves like that. So now with the sleeve right side out, take the extension, go right over it, bring the little seam to the seam, and clip. And I'm just going to baste on one sleeve, try it on, make sure I'm happy before I serge both. So I'll just baste around at the edge of my presser foot and then give that a little try on. Okay, so the challenge here is that both edges want to curl up on me. Good. Quick little try on, we'll see. Okay, oh my goodness, it's so nice. Like it's sort of elevated and beautiful. So I'm excited. I'm just gonna now get the other one on and then serge both and then do that applique. Okay, so you can see the sleeves are done. And I'm really happy with them. I love the flare. That worked out so nice. And I like this little strip of the stripe going the opposite way. It just softens that seam and makes it look more purposeful. So I'm really happy with the sleeves. So the making things longer part of this project is done. But I just want to show you how taking an extra step can make it look more intentional. And I really love this graphic. What I'm thinking now, instead of just appliquing it on as is, I'm going to trim it closer. But then I also thought maybe I could use these 3 little ones. I might just put 2 on one sleeve, 1 on the other sleeve, and then have the main part of the graphic here on the front. Because I think that that's kind of complete on its own. So I think this is the fun part, right? This is called Transweb. There's other brands and other names for it, but it's basically glue on paper. I want to lay this out with the gluey side to the wrong side of my graphic. I'll be ironing it on like this, but to make it easier to trim this, I'm going to go this way with the good side of my graphic onto the paper side of the Transweb. That is just so I can draw on the paper side. I'm gonna draw this shape, then I'm gonna cut it a little bit smaller than my drawing. And then iron the Transweb onto it. So now this has become like an iron-on patch. So I'm gonna cut closer. Cute. 1 on one sleeve, 2 on the other. I like that. Okay, so as I've mentioned, I was doing some fitting on this. So I just had the sides basted to fit, but now I've opened up the sides again. That just makes it so much easier to do this kind of applique. If I wasn't doing that fitting, I probably would have just struggled with it closed up, but it definitely is easier if it's open on the sides. Then I can peel off the paper. I had a bit of a struggle at the corner. The glue is supposed to stick to the fabric, not to the paper. Okay. If I was a more cautious person, I would try this on and make sure it's good as it is. But you know what? What's the worst that can happen? It's beautiful no matter what. I'll give it a little steam. All right. So ironing that on. Now I don't just iron it on. The ironing on part just helps me to keep everything nice and stable when I take it to the machine. Okay, and then over to the sewing machine. So with that in place, I'm using a regular zigzag with 2.5 millimeters width and just 1.8 millimeters in the length. Okay, so then I'll just go around this whole outside edge of my applique. That's looking pretty good. And that looks really sweet. Cute, right? And I just serged those two side seams together again, so this one is done. And of course, it's my new favorite t-shirt. I love the sleeves. I think that is so pretty. I love it, and I love the graphic. If you look at the before of this t-shirt, the sleeves and the graphic just transform this t-shirt into something that I think is really, really pretty. So this one is done. Let's move on. All right, the fourth way I want to show you today is called a false hem. And this is something that tailors have done for years. This is not my own invention. A false hem really is a thing. You'll need some fabric. It's not even going to show, so it doesn't have to match perfectly. It's just we're going to be inserting that into the bottom edge to create a deeper hem. If you have pants that are almost long enough, you just want to add an inch, it's never a good idea to just lower the hem and make like a 1/4 inch deep hem on a pair of pants. It does not look good. The hem tends to wiggle, and it can look really, really cheap to have a skinny little hem on a pair of pants. My son's girlfriend is tall, long legs, and it's hard always to find pants long enough. So she's got these yoga pants, and I thought they just need another inch or so. I'll fix her pants in 2 ways. First, I'll do the false hem, which is not going to give her quite enough length, so I'm going to do it in a temporary way. I'll do it in a fabric that contrasts so you can see the color, but I'll immediately take it out again and do it with an extra band on the bottom. And that's going to give her enough length. It's going to look good, but that way I'll be able to show you both techniques. Good. I am filled with regret that I chose yoga pants as my sample though, because this triple needle overlocked hem is a nightmare to unpick. There are 3 needles, and I was hoping to find just like that magic thread that you could just pull and the whole thing unravels, but no, there is just no such thing. So basically you've got 3 needle threads to pull. I've done one leg, and I cannot say that I had a good time doing that. If you're doing this like on a regular pair of dress pants, it's so much easier to remove your stitches. And be patient though, you don't want to make holes in the fabric because this is still all going to show at the end. So if you make holes in it, it's kind of game over. So one leg is done, and I tried to steam out any horizontal lines, and it's pretty good. I'm hoping that when these get washed, those remaining shadows of the previous lines will disappear. If you just want to add a little bit of length to a pair of pants, or if you're sewing from scratch and the length is like just barely long enough and you can only afford to lose about a 1/4 inch of length, then what you want is called a false hem. So I'm going to do my false hem in this purple fabric just to make a nice contrast so that you can see what I'm doing. But I am going to be removing it because in this situation she needs more length than what this will give her. So if I just measure the circumference of the leg and I add just a small bit of seam allowance, that when I sew that seam, it's going to fit in there nicely. And the width of this strip that I've cut is 1.5 inches wide. I want to end up with the look of a 1.25 inch hem, and I need a little bit of seam allowance on the bottom. So 1.5 inches is perfect. Alrighty, so the first thing I need to do is sew those little ends together. Okay, so I've just serged one edge of that strip, and that's not the edge that I'm going to be sewing to, the edge of the pant. So I'm turning this inside out, putting it right side together with the pant leg. I'll just clip or pin that unserged edge to the bottom of the leg. And then we'll go to the regular sewing machine. And then I'll just sew that on just at the edge of my presser foot, so a little bit less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to use a long stitch length since I will need to remove this again. This is just for demonstration purposes. Okay, so that's my new area that's going to be hemmed. The nicest way is if I push that out over the seam allowance and do a little bit of an understitch here. That gives you the nicest edge. So I'm sewing this strip to the seam allowance, opening it out flat. That's what understitching is, and it gives you a much better edge here. Okay. I'm just doing a part of it just to show you. So that edge now just turns nice and crisp, whereas the area that's not understitched is going to be much softer and harder to deal with, harder to get it to turn in nicely. But where it's understitched, it's just super nice. And then I would just, whatever method you want to use to hem, whether you're going to do a hand sewn hem, double needle, whatever you want to do, now you would just do that hem. Okay, so that hem on the outside looks like a nice deep 1.25 inches. And it has the weight, right? It makes your pants hang nicely rather than just a skinny little hem that gives no weight to the bottom of the leg. You'd go, of course, all the way around. I'm just doing that little bit to show you, but that is a false hem, and it's really, really a handy skill to have. Okay, and you can see that my purple fabric doesn't show on the outside at all. Like, you really can, it doesn't have to be a matching fabric. It's nice if it does match, but if it doesn't match, you're okay. Alrighty. So what I will be doing on these yoga pants for the final hem is a separate band. And so I found some like decently matching fabric, and I just wanted to show you a pair of pants that I've already done. I made these for a video probably a couple years ago, and at the time I cut them to be ankle length. And then I decided that I did not want ankle length, I wanted full length. So they normally would have been finished here, right? If I turned that up for a hem, they would have ended there. But instead, I just added in this separate band, sewed it on, serged it, and then top stitched it. And it also gives that nice weight to make the pant hang nicely. And it kind of looks just like a normal hem. If you look closely, you'll see that seam, but it still looks good. It definitely looks intentional. So for this one, then what I've cut are 2 bands of fabric. They are 3 inches wide. And still, again, just the circumference of the leg. And I'm going to just join those ends. And into the iron, and then just press those seams open and flat. And then fold the whole thing in half. This is exactly like making a cuff. There's just no difference. You'll just go in half. Easy peasy, right? Get that nice and even. So this band is going to show, so I'm going to put the seam of the band to the inseam of the pants, just to be a little bit more discreet with that. But it's essentially the same as before, where I'm just getting it on the right side. This is the outside of the pant leg. I'm getting it right side together, all 3 raw edges together, seam to seam. So it's just like a cuff, except that it's the same circumference as the pant leg. It's not smaller than the most cuffs would be. I think what I will do is just serge this on. I don't think I'm going to sew it first and then serge. I think I'll just straight up serge. I know black on black is hard to see, but I'm trying to get as much light on here as I can. So the nice thing about serging is that it just takes such a small amount of seam allowance, so I'm losing as little as possible here in the length. So you can see the shadow of the line of the original hem. So what this is giving her is a full 2 inches extra, right? The false hem really only gave her about 3/4 of an inch extra, but this is this is part of that original hem plus the band. So it really does give you a nice boost in the length. I'm pressing it with the seam allowance going up toward the pant leg, and then I'll just put a little line of stitching around there just to hold that in place so the seam allowance stays going up and the band doesn't tend to flip once it's been washed. Okay, and again, starting at that inseam so that my back tack is a little more discreet, I'll just do a little edge stitch here. And I'm going to increase my stitch length to 3.5 millimeters. And I am just using a straight stitch because this is flared enough. I don't think I have to worry too much about this edge needing to stretch, and the serging will keep it pretty stable. So I think I'm fine with a straight stitch here. I'm also just using a universal needle, but I tested it out and it didn't damage the fabric at all. It's all good. Okay, so there's the new hem with that band. I think that the edge stitch adds a nice touch. It really does make it look more finished, as if that band is meant to be there. So there you go. The yoga pants are now 2 inches longer. I think that'll be great. Okay, I think we're done lengthening for today. Okay, so there you have it. A bunch of different ways to add length to sleeves, pants, skirts, and dresses. I hope that served you well, that you got something good out of that. Thank you so much for being with me right to the end. It means a lot to me. So until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care.